Coming up, a special edition of the ICT Newscast, a preview of the White House Tribal Nations Summit, plus we check in with Jean-Luc Pierite, the board president of the North American Indian Center of Boston, and we hear from the president of the National Congress of American Indians. We have those interviews and more on the ICT Newscast.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.
The ICT Newscast is sponsored by the Indian Land Tenure Foundation, a nonprofit organization serving American Indian nations and people in the recovery and control of their rightful homelands. On the web at iltf.org.
Support for the ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez comes from the Arizona PBS studios in Phoenix at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communications at Arizona State University. Welcome to this special edition of the ICT Newscast. I'm Mark Trahant. We hear from correspondents across the country, letting us know what's coming up with the White House Tribal Nations Summit this week in Washington, D.C. We start with a conversation I had with the president of the National Congress of American Indians, Mark Maccaro. President Maccaro, thank you for joining us today and congratulations.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
We mentioned on the newscast that being elected president of NCAI in a lot of ways is like being the president of Indian country. You're called first to testify. Your words carry great weight, both on Capitol Hill and internationally. Maybe talk a minute about what your vision is for that.
Well, the vision here is to reset our footing in Washington, D.C. We really need to reestablish a strong presence in Washington, D.C., inside the Beltway, in Congress, in the administration, and with White House. And so, 90% of life is being present, right? So I think what we need to do, and what I've already talked to our new executive committee about, is a scheduling of a series of meetings between now and the Executive Council winter session in February to reestablish our mission in Washington, D.C. physically, and then to do some strategizing and carry forth, begin to have that discussion about our priorities, especially as we end one congressional year and begin another, and hit the ground running by the time the Executive Council winter session rolls around in February.
In a couple of weeks, the White House summit will take place, and it's an opportunity to kind of talk with executive branch about some of these issues.
Absolutely.
What are some of the primary objectives of that?
Well, that's a time when the White House likes to highlight a lot of the positives that it has brought before Indian country and emphasize those. I do believe also new initiatives are often rolled out at that time. So that'll be a chance for Indian country to have a look at what those initiatives are and have an honest conversation or dialogue with the White House, with the administration on the relative merits of those initiatives. And are they hitting the mark with them? Did they leave something out? Because if they do, they will be called out, and we'll have to point. Look, all these things, A through E, great. F through M, we need you to pay attention to this. We need focus on this now and over the next 2 years. And so I think we'll be prepared to do that. At this point, we don't have any indication, at least I don't yet, in terms of what will be rolled out by the administration and the various agencies. So, and if we do, we'll let you know. But at this point, we don't know yet.
Yaet she Polly Denekla Yanishia, Hilson Ishlando, Kia Ani Bashichin, Bit Ani Dashichedo, she and Dashanilla, Kinhojona Dat Nasha. Hi everyone, my name is Polly Denekla. I am Meadow People born for Towering House People. I'm a citizen of the Navajo Nation, and I'm the political correspondent for ICT. I'm currently based in Washington, D.C., and this week is the White House Tribal Nations Summit. Over 300 leaders from across the nation will come to Washington, D.C., some of them traveling thousands of miles to come and be here for the summit. And the importance of the summit is that it acts as a deadline for the Biden administration from their priorities a year prior. And also at the summit, it allows the Biden administration to tell tribal leaders what is the focus for the upcoming year and what their goals are for the administration. The summit is a complex event and situation because there are over 300 tribal leaders who attend annually. The summit was started under the Obama administration, and under the Trump administration, they didn't really hold the White House Tribal Nations Summit, but then the Biden administration did bring it back. And what makes the situation so complex is that there are so many tribal leaders, and allowing the space and time for them to feel heard, for them to feel as though they can express to their federal partners their perspectives and their needs from their communities, especially when we're talking about small tribes. And that really is the problem, because a lot of the smaller tribes can't really afford to travel to Washington, D.C. frequently to be able to have these discussions with their federal partners. And so the summit has had critiques in the past about being more like a conference, and tribal leaders last year said that they felt as though the administration and federal officials were talking to them and not with them. And so that's why it makes it so challenging, is how do you have an environment that is so large and still be able to have that back and forth and that nation-to-nation building? Tribes that have less resources often don't have the connections, or they don't have sort of the relationships built to where they're able to maneuver in these spaces and get into these rooms and get in front of federal officials that they're wanting to meet with. And that presents a problem in of itself. And for larger tribes like the Navajo Nation, the Cherokee Nation, who are often coming to Washington, D.C. to meet with federal officials, they're more able to then have these conversations at the summit. I think it is so important for tribal leaders to be able to engage with the staff of these very important high-profile people, and especially the senior policy folks who are working with these federal officials, whether it's at the Interior, whether it's at BIA, whether it's at USDA. It's really important for them to be able to engage with policy advisors because they're really the ones who are helping to craft policy, to craft change within an administration. And so having tribal leaders be able to meet these folks, it's very important for policy advisors to also be able to have these conversations, because then they know what is important to tribal leaders. And this goes for whether you're in the Pacific Northwest or whether you're in the South, being able to understand how a certain policy will impact all of these nations. There's 576 federally recognized tribes, and so it is a lot of nations to be able to think about when you're crafting policy. The Biden administration has made historic appointments of Native people to various positions across the administration. And we have seen a photo of all the Biden appointees, and there's dozens of them. And they're at Commerce, they're at the Treasury, they're obviously at the Interior and BIA and IHS and some of those places where we normally see folks, but they're also at the USDA. And that is really important, especially as the USDA is really learning about their treaty obligations and have put an emphasis on it over the past couple of years, especially under the Biden administration, really understanding what the USDA, what treaty obligations the USDA has to Native nations. And so having those appointments within a department that normally wouldn't be seen as having to engage with tribal leaders and tribal nations is really important. And so as we've seen, they've been able to move projects forward. And last year, we heard a lot from the USDA about some of the things that they were able to accomplish. And that's all because of these political appointments. I think it is so important that tribal nations are covered year-round, but I do understand that the summit does provide a unique opportunity for these bigger outlets, these national outlets, to be able to cover a very underserved and underreported community. And I think it does come with issues in that you do have people who don't really understand the issues, who don't understand tribal sovereignty, who don't understand nation-to-nation relationship that tribal nations have with the federal government. And so while they are covering this and they are talking about the commitments that the Biden administration is making to tribal nations in terms of the priorities for the next year, they oftentimes don't have that historical or policy background to be able to root it in context. And so I think that does present issues as well, because tribal sovereignty is very key to reporting on the summit, and oftentimes that does fall to the wayside. Last year, Vice President Kamala Harris made a speech at the Tribal Nations Summit, and she is once again expected to be at the summit this year. This past summer, Aaliyah Chavez was able to sit down with Kamala Harris and ask her some of the important questions for Indian country. Here she is with that conversation.
Madam Vice President, welcome to the ICT Newscast.
It's good to be with you. Thank you.
We're visiting today on the homelands of the Acamil Altam and Peepash in Gila River. And this is the first time that a sitting vice president or a president has ever visited this tribal nation. Why is it a personal priority for you to be here today?
Well, at the invitation of the governor, I am here, but this is part of a longstanding commitment I've had in my career, which is to work with Indian country to do what is necessary to strengthen the partnership and address the needs, right? And so being here is an extension of that longstanding work. And in particular, because the governor and what is happening here on this land in particular is some really extraordinary example of how the partnership can look to address global challenges like the climate crisis. So in fact, I don't think you're going to be able to go, but I think there's going to be a group coming to see when we go to see the infrastructure project. Well, President Biden and I have been very proud that we have dedicated $7 billion to Indian country to address water infrastructure. The work that we are doing to, again, deal with disparities also includes acknowledging that for so many people, in indigenous people who don't have access to high-speed internet. And so the president and I feel very strongly about that, and we've dedicated $2 billion to what we need to do for Indian country to support the installation of high-speed internet. So these are some of the examples of the partnership, and I do believe it's just important to be present to acknowledge the importance of the relationship.
Under President Biden's tenure, we've seen a very high number of Indigenous people who have been appointed to the highest levels of federal government, namely Interior Secretary Deb Haaland. Do you believe that the Biden-Harris administration is setting the bar for these kinds of appointments? And how do you ensure that that momentum moves forward into the future, regardless of who the next president is?
Well, the president and I feel very strongly that we should not be burdened by things the way they've always been. We should be looking to what should be. And so the fact that Secretary Haaland is the first Native secretary in a president's cabinet is because we believe that representation should occur. It should happen. And so that's the work that we are doing, in partnership with Indian country. Not being about handouts, but about partnership, not about, well, let's consult with tribal leaders after we do something, but let's ask tribal leaders to be part of the leadership of an initiative and an innovative initiative. And we feel very strongly that that is the appropriate way to do our work. And I do believe that we are setting a new model for what the interaction and what the partnership should be. Always grounded in full appreciation and respect for tribal sovereignty, always grounded in full appreciation and respect for the need to ensure and keep intact trust and treaties, and to do the work in a collaborative way.
One of the areas of growth is that of judicial appointments. There are not many Native Americans who are federal judges. There's never been a Native American on the U.S. Supreme Court. What can we expect from the Biden administration in terms of judicial appointments?
Well, I cannot speak about any names in particular, but I can tell you that the president and I have been closely monitoring what must happen to ensure that the federal bench reflects the faces and the names and the numbers of all people in our country. And we are very proud of what we have done to accelerate representation on the federal courts, and we'll continue to do that.
I want to talk about a crisis, and that's missing and murdered Indigenous relatives. And you saw this firsthand, both as a U.S. Senator, but also as California Attorney General. What are your thoughts on bringing the much needed relief to Indigenous families that they deserve?
You know, as a former prosecutor, this issue is something that I care deeply about. I have worked on it, to your point, in my past work in California, and I will continue to prioritize it. It is absolutely tragic that we have so many people who have gone missing or have been murdered, and that there has not been a response that is nationwide to understand what is happening and why we must all stand up and say that this is not right, and let's put the resources into it. The president signed an executive order, a presidential executive order on this very issue shortly after we came in office to do just that, to elevate the issue and to elevate the kind of response and resources. Secretary Holland has created a whole division within the Department of Interior that did not exist before to specifically address this issue. So we are going to continue to work on it. But for the families and for those individuals, it shouldn't be happening. And of course, our prayers are with the families, but we also are putting in the resources to do something about it.
I want to end on, of course, the historic bipartisan infrastructure law that brought record amounts of funding to Indian country.
Yeah.
What are you most proud of from that legislation?
Well, the water infrastructure work that we're doing, the climate work we're doing as a general matter. You know, I have traveled around the world as vice president. I have met with over 100 world leaders, be they presidents, prime ministers, kings, including presidents and the chair people who are here during this visit. And when I look at the global impact of this issue and the need for us to take it seriously, what I'm most excited about is the partnership that the president and I have developed and strengthened with tribal leaders to work on this. As I said earlier, our Indigenous people have been the stewards of this issue for millennia, of the need to protect and honor the natural resources of this beautiful earth. And so I'm excited that through the infrastructure law, we're able to actually put resources into that, like the $7 billion going to the water infrastructure, going specifically to Indian country, to uplift and to praise the long-standing generational leadership on this issue.
Well, Vice President Harris, in my community, we say Naitra, which means thank you so much.
Thank you.
Please join us again.
Thank you. I look forward to it. Thank you.
Not too long ago, there were no federally recognized tribes in Massachusetts. Today, there are but 2. Helping to raise the profile of natives in the Bay State is the North American Indian Center of Boston. I caught up with the center's Jean-Luc Pierite recently, and I asked him about a bill in the legislature that would ban offensive mascots in high schools.
The ban on racist mascots is only one of the bills within our full Massachusetts Indigenous legislative agenda. It's a slate of 5 bills. The mascots issue, establishing a statewide Indigenous Peoples Day, celebrating Native American culture and history within public school curriculum, establishing a special commission relative to the educational outcomes of American Indians, Alaska Natives, and then protecting Native American heritage, which is a refinement of NAGPRA on the state level to ensure that all publicly funded entities follow those guidelines if they move to deacquisition, meaning that we're trying as much as we can to keep our sacred objects and human remains out of auction houses. North American Indian Center of Boston, United American Indians in New England, we are the 2 sort of community partners that have helped form this coalition of other community partners such as Italian Americans for Indigenous Peoples Day, Mass Peace Action, the Massachusetts Mascots Coalition, and Cultural Survival, and many more community partners. So we're pushing for everybody to show up. We're using this as a way to kind of promote civic engagement for American Indians and Alaska Natives within Massachusetts. So we're having more people interact with the State House and providing testimony and so forth. So, we're definitely really pushing this, and we've had some success in terms of passing the bill to establish a commission to revise the state seal and motto.
Tell me a little bit about the center.
Yes. So we're a North American Indian Center of Boston. We started life as an organization as the Boston Indian Council. We were founded in 1969 and then formally incorporated in 1970. So for over 50 years, we have provided cultural and social services for the New England Native American community. And we've worked to provide those services, but we also work within coalition spaces. So we do a lot of work within environmental justice, within racial justice, within economic justice. And we definitely continue to push for more civic engagement amongst our communities. One of the successes that we've had within the past few years, because we definitely struggle with the issue of data equity here within Massachusetts, underreporting or no reporting of statistics around how violence impacts our women through sexual assault and domestic violence. The COVID-19 pandemic, it took us 9 months to push for disaggregation of American Indian and Alaska Native data outside of a category called Other. And in spite of all of those challenges towards data equity, we have successfully pushed our community to respond to the 2020 census. So, the American Indian population self-identifying, at one point we were estimated at about 35 to 50,000. And now we're at about around 95,000 within the state. And so you see, a lot more people identifying themselves. And it's made our community stronger.
Tell me a little bit about the National Day of Mourning at Plymouth Rock.
Yeah, so every year at Plymouth since 1970, Indigenous peoples from across the Americas have converged upon Plymouth, Massachusetts, and this is in commemoration of the first National Day of Mourning. This was a day in which a Wampanoag elder by the name of Frank Wamsutta James was invited to give a speech on the 350th anniversary of the landing of the Mayflower. And what Wamsutta sought out to do was actually do truth-telling from a Wampanoag perspective. And unfortunately, he was disinvited to give that speech. And so because that speech was never delivered, people continue to converge on Plymouth since 1970, so that all Indigenous peoples from across the Americas and globally can come and actually tell their truths about the impacts of colonization.
Well, great. Well, I want to thank you very much for your time this morning, sir.
Absolutely, Stuart. Thank you for doing this.
ICT invites you to be a part of something special.
Each week, we're taking on a different topic important to Indigenous people and you, our viewers and readers.
Find the link at ictnews.org to sign up for the e-weekly newsletter.
It's emailed on Thursdays. We're covering food, business, economic development, and arts and culture.
And for December, we're working on a very special holiday edition on the web at ictnews.org.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world.
For all the latest, visit ictnews.org.
And from all of us in the newsroom,
Stay safe, my relatives.
Stay safe, my relatives.
stay safe, my relatives.
Stay safe, my relatives.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.